Hi there. I've just got back from one of the most important gardens in the UK, and there were lots of ideas that I think we could really use in our own smaller gardens. It's Alexandra here from the Middle-Sized Garden YouTube channel and blog, and I've just come back from RHS Wisley in Surrey, which is the flagship garden of the Royal Horticultural Society. It's also where they have their main scientific labs, the Hilltop Research Centre, and where they trial plants. The RHS Recommended AGM label is an award that's given to plants that are trialled here at Wisley or around Britain over a number of 2 or 3, 4 years and have turned out to be the ones that are the most reliable for domestic gardens. For the last couple of years, RHS Wisley has been very difficult to get to. There have been some horrendous roadworks around the M25, and those are now over. And although the gardens were open throughout that time, there's a sense that they have now reopened. There's a sense of excitement and celebration. And of course, it's very large. There are 25 or more different garden areas, from the naturalistic planting of the Oudolf Landscape to the more traditional cottage garden, or the Boeslian rose garden, or the alpine garden, and many more. But actually what I found was that there were just some lovely little things that you could look at and bring home for much smaller gardens. So let's have a look at those. I think the first thing I noticed when I went into the cottage garden is that there were just the most wonderful smell and sight of lilacs. Lilacs are a traditional cottage garden shrub, but they've been a bit forgotten about over the years. There were dozens of lilacs in the cottage garden, ranging from white and the typical lilac colour and deep reds. And one nice little tip I noticed is that most of them were planted next to a rose, and the foliage was just emerging, and there was perhaps an obelisk or maybe a shrub rose. And it's clear that in a few weeks' time, when the lilac flowers are over, the roses will take over that flowering. So in that quite small spot, you will have shrub flowering for quite a long time. Of course, one of the reasons why shrubs have become out of favour is that they're pruned badly. I think we all know those lump and misshapen shrubs hunched in the back of borders. Lilac, along with quite a lot of other flowering shrubs, needs pruning immediately after the flowers die because it grows on old wood, so it needs a summer to grow that wood for the flowers next year. But of course, something I used to do, and I'm sure lots of people do, is just sort of hack off the flowers, and then the shrub is just left there like a lump, and it sprouts in places where you didn't want it to sprout. If you look at shrubs at a garden like RHS Wisley, you will see beautiful pruning. And the lilacs in the cottage garden were pruned to be rather like multi-stemmed trees. There was very few leaves on the lower branches, and they had 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 stems, and they arched gracefully. And of course what that means is that they let in enough light so that during the summer months you can have shade-loving ground covers on the soil beneath them. And of course, because the leaves are off the lilac bushes from autumn to spring, it's a brilliant place to plant sun-loving bulbs like tulips and daffodils. So that really means that there's some colour in that particular spot for months at a time. Of course, not all shrubs have to be pruned to be airy and elegant. Some of them are best clipped into shapes, and of course the very best of this is box. But box all over the world is being affected by box blight and the box moth caterpillar, and hundreds of thousands of box plants have simply died. So the RHS has been researching the alternatives to box, and there's a whole selection of them in its walled garden here at RHS Wisley. The RHS says that there's probably no perfect alternative to box, but if you focus on what you really want from your plant, then all of these plants in the walled garden make a good alternative for clipping. That includes podocarpus, yew, evergreen honeysuckle, and a number of others. There's a beautiful berberis, for example, there. I've got a video which I'll put in the description below, which has some more alternatives to box. It's called Blobberies: Why Your Garden Needs Cones, Balls and Blobs. Clashing vibrant colour isn't to everyone's tastes, but it certainly makes a garden pack a punch. And perhaps it's better to go and look at vibrant colour in other gardens before deciding whether to try it yourself. These amazing tulips outside the old laboratories surrounding the Jellicoe Canal are just fantastic. They're extraordinary. And really when you walk in and you just see, oh, it punches you in the face. And also, what about this combination of maple and azalea? Anybody who's got a patch of rather worn lawn, I think, will be interested in this idea coming up. There are tens of thousands of feet every year at RHS Wisley, and some of the areas between the gardens will get trodden on over and over again. So the temptation is perhaps to pave them over entirely or to cover them in concrete. But actually, that's not great. It's hot, it's expensive, and of course it prevents water from draining away. I rather like this idea, which showed a sort of wider than a path, but not quite a terrace, between the cottage garden and the exotic garden. And I think it keeps many of the benefits of the lawn. It encourages people to tread on the pavers, you automatically do. Of course, there's a lot of debate about the value of lawns now. In the UK and in other temperate countries, our lawns are made of native grasses. We don't, on the whole, have to irrigate them, fertilise them, or do very much to them at all. They absorb carbon, they absorb rainfall, and they're a great asset to wildlife. There are worms and microorganisms in the soil, and my birds certainly love the lawn in my house. But of course, if you live in a country where a lawn is not native grasses and you have to use masses of irrigation and fertilisers and mowing to keep it in good condition, it is not as environmentally friendly. But it is important to remember that it matters what the situation is where you are. So if someone is saying that lawns are evil, then just look into it where you are. Which brings me to the next thing I spotted at Wisley, which is wisteria looking gorgeous. Now, the Asian and Japanese wisterias are very invasive in North America, but there are, in fact, native wisterias in North America that people can use. So wherever you live, you can have a wisteria, but it does matter which one. And the other thing with wisteria is keep it trimmed. This is kept trimmed and espaliered up the wall, and if you trim the branches, the roots won't grow so much either. So an awful lot of what people say about wisteria can actually be prevented if you get the right kind of wisteria and you keep it under control. If you go up to the wildlife garden, which is near the Hilltop Science Labs, it's very much on a domestic level. It doesn't feel big, and there are lots of ideas there for incorporating it into gardens at home, like little piles of logs. And one of the things that I really liked was this giant sculpture. Of course, you would have a much smaller, perhaps, sculpture in a smaller garden. But inside those slatted wood curves is all the kind of bug hotels and clippings and materials that wildlife will find so useful, particularly in winter, either for shelter or for building nests or for hibernating. And of course, we're all told to have untidy bits of our garden, but there are definitely some people who don't want an untidy bit of your garden. So pack it away inside a sculpture. The birds and the beasties can get through the slats, and you can look at a lovely piece of art. Another idea I really liked was this mini dead hedge used as edging. Dead hedges are another wildlife-friendly feature. You get 2 lines of poles and you put garden clippings and branches in between them and build them up. And they slowly break down, and they're a habitat, and they're very useful for birds and insects. But they're quite big for small gardens, whereas this mini one used as edging has some of the benefits of a dead hedge without actually sort of blocking your view. And what about a green roof for your shed? You could do a DIY green roof, or there are now lots of green roof installers that you can find near you. It needs to be a flat roof or a slope of no more than 25 degrees, and you will need to check that the shed can carry the weight. The lightest green roofs are sedums, and they're also the cheapest to buy and also the easiest to maintain. As you can see, this duck is really enjoying this green roof. I think one of the most valuable things about major gardens like RHS Wisley is just the way they combine planting. Almost every border and every corner has plants put together in a way that actually, if you look at them through your fingers like this, can really give you something for your garden. When I was there, it was mainly tulips and spring flowering plants. But of course, you'll find different inspiration at different times of year. One thing I particularly liked, for example, was using tulips of the same colour but a different variety so that the petals were a bit different, which gave a lovely textured effect, like with these white tulips here and the pink tulips, which are against the ginkgo biloba and the rosemary. One really dazzling combination was a Chinese cercis along with some bulbs. It was a lovely white blossom of shrub and then a scattering of pink and jewel coloured bulbs, and it was quite breathtaking. There's also quite an interesting echoing of shapes with the pointed ballerina tulips and then the candelabras of the ground cover pine, Pinus mugo. And even daffodils. The yellow daffodils is picked up with the variegated vinca that you can see here. It's very simple, they're very common plants, but they just look great together. Another really famous part of the garden at RHS Wisley is the Oudolf Landscape, which has recently been replanted. So don't miss that in the autumn. And if you can't get there in person, don't miss this video coming up next, which is 5 planting lessons from the Oudolf Landscape. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.